for Common Sense Matters, and hey, we got Helen Stapleton hanging out with us today, and I think you brought somebody with you.
Yes. Hi, my name is Helen Stapleton, and I'm the Secretary of the Franklin County Democratic Party, and you're listening to Common Sense Matters, our bi-weekly radio show, where we discuss issues that will affect you in your daily life. And today I have with me Stephen Alvarez. He is a photographer for National Geographic. I'll get into his bio in just a sec, but first, before we get into the interview, I wanted to just make a few announcements for the Franklin County Democratic Party. And that is that the Franklin County Democratic Women will be meeting on Tuesday, June 13th at 6 o'clock at JD's Country Kitchen Restaurant. That's at 626 Davy Crockett Highway. Anyone is welcome. So again, that's Franklin County Democratic Women's Meeting, Tuesday, June 13th at 6 o'clock at JD's Country Kitchen. And then on Saturday, June 17th at 9 a.m., the whole party will be meeting. So that will be at the Franklin County Annex. So if you are a Democrat, want to get involved, please show up. If you care about stuff like health care, raising the minimum wage, the environment, all these types of things, please join us. So again, that's Saturday, June 17th at 9 a.m., and that's at the Franklin County Annex on Dinosaur Boulevard. So I want to introduce y'all to Stephen Alvarez. I've known him for a really long time. I'm going to just read you his bio off of his website to tell you a little bit about him. He is an award-winning National Geographic photographer, filmmaker, and explorer who produces global stories about exploration, adventure, culture, and archaeology. He has published over a dozen feature stories in National Geographic magazine. The magazine has sent him from the highest peaks in the Andes to the depths of the deepest cave in the world. His latest National Geographic story on the origins of art led him from the early human sites on the southern coast of Africa to Paleolithic art caves in France and Spain. His images have won awards in Pictures of the Year, International, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go into too much detail. Recent appearances include NPR, PBS, and CBS Saturday Morning, and WCDT. We would like to add to that now. Stephen is also a frequent consultant and commenter on how new photographic technology is changing the world. All right, and he lives right here in Franklin County.
Shut up.
Yeah, with his wife and 2 children in Suwanee. And we are so happy to have him here to talk with us about President Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords.
Right.
So anyway, just to start off, could you just briefly tell us a little bit about the Paris Accords and maybe how it affects us?
Yeah, and good morning, Helen. It's great to be here, and I'm a lifelong resident of Franklin County, so it's a pleasure to be on the radio here. I love this. So you want to know a little bit about the Paris Accord, and essentially it's a framework of agreements from nations to limit global warming, so limit our carbon emissions with the aim of keeping temperature rise to under 2 degrees centigrade, so 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. And it's a voluntary accord, and it's maybe imperfect. However, it is something that every nation on earth except for Syria and Nicaragua agreed to.
Okay. All right. You and your wife just got back from a trip to Antarctica. I don't know many people who've been to Antarctica. Actually, Helen Tennerman, who lives here in Winchester, has been, and I believe she went on a National Geographic boat like y'all did. So tell us, did you notice any effects of climate change while you were in Antarctica? Did you witness things there that...
Well, that's a difficult question for me because it was my first trip, so I don't have time. I don't have a lot of experience there to compare to what I saw in Antarctica to what had happened before. But what I do know is from listening to the captain of our ship, who has been going to the continent for 20, 30 years. We got to go further south this year than he had ever gone this early in the season because there was less sea ice. And the naturalists on our ship were pointing out that there are huge changes in where the numbers of penguins and where they're living, because there are tremendous changes in when spring comes and how much ice there is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how about in other travels? Have you seen effects of water rising?
Well,
or
you know,
anything like
the
that?
place I actually see the climate change as being, or the most obvious effects of climate change are places relatively close to home. You know, look, I travel for a living. I travel about 200 days a year, most of it international. But the places I really see it are places I've been going to since I was a child. So the Outer Banks of North Carolina, Tangier Island in the Chesapeake, the Gulf Coast, and these are things that are close to home. And you know, sea levels are coming up. That's pushing people out of their homes there. So you look at Tangier, that island in the Chesapeake is going to go underwater in our lifetime, and those people are going to have to move somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And you know, this is something that is happening in front of our eyes. And the other thing that I see are storms tend to be bigger. You look at Katrina, that devastated New Orleans, and the number of people that displaced temporarily in New Orleans, but the number of people who actually moved out of New Orleans after Katrina. Largely anyone who could did. But imagine a storm a little more devastating than that, then all those millions of people will move out of New Orleans and they'll move somewhere else. They'll move here. They'll move to Franklin County.
And drive up our property prices.
They will drive. Coastal communities moving inland will drive up property prices, and the next thing you know, our kids can't afford houses here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. One thing that frustrates me, I do believe in climate change. A lot of people don't.
Well, the science on climate change is not in dispute. The models that were talked about in the 80s are right on track. What people said was going to happen in 1983 is happening right now. The science isn't in dispute.
Mm-hmm. But even if you did, though, one thing that nobody can dispute, nobody in the world, is that oil and gas are finite, right? I mean, there is a finite amount of oil and gas in the ground, and eventually we're going to pump it all out, and then what are we going to do? That's why I think we really need to follow things like the Paris Climate Accord, because that gets us onto renewable energy sooner. Because it really scares me to think, okay, we're going to run out, we are going to run out of oil and gas sooner or later. So we've got to get a renewable energy infrastructure in place well in advance of that. Don't you agree?
Well, I do agree. And the reason we use oil, the reason we use coal, the reason we use natural gas is they're relatively cheap. I mean, it's a cheap way and an easy way to get energy.
We used it to get down here this morning.
We used it to get down here this morning, and I love my truck. I don't want, but that's not the issue. The issue is clean energy is going to happen. I mean, it is going to happen, and we can lead the world in clean energy, and we can create a tremendous number of new jobs. Or we can let the Chinese and the Indians do it, because you know what? They're going to do it. They can't afford to poison themselves by polluting. They have tremendously dense populations, and they're going to go with the best and the cheapest energy, and they are investing heavily in clean energy technology. Mm-hmm. And we can lead the world, or they can lead the world. It comes down to a matter of what do we want our country to be? Do we want to be leaders in this or not? And if we're leaders in it, we're going to create a new economy, and an economy that creates really, really good jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's President Trump seems to, with almost every situation, have sort of a zero-sum mentality. Like, if you're winning, I'm losing. If I'm winning, you're losing. So he sort of has framed this Paris Accord as Paris versus Pittsburgh, and like, if Paris is winning, then Pittsburgh is losing. So it's almost like either you have a good environment or you have jobs, but you can't have both. Or either Paris is doing well or Pittsburgh is doing well, but they can't both be doing well. That's sort of his mindset. I completely disagree. I think it's a win-win. I mean, what do you think, Stephen?
Well,
About jobs versus the environment, that kind of thing.
Well, first off, Pittsburgh came down clearly, in every major city in the United States came down clearly on the side of clean energy and building a clean energy economy. And so we're seeing leadership on clean energy at the local level, and that's exciting. The mayor of Pittsburgh has committed to clean energy within 50 years. And it's not either or. It is a zero-sum game in that if we don't figure this out, humanity as a whole has tremendous problems. But
both Paris and Pittsburgh.
Right. Everywhere. I mean, you look at what happens if we go back to a variable climate, and it is truly horrific. Well, the carrying capacity of the Earth right now is huge. It's probably 9 billion people. But if we go back to a variable climate, the carrying capacity of the Earth is somewhere around 150,000 people.
What do you mean by variable climate?
Well, the last 5 years of my career, I've been looking at the deep history of humanity. So as long as we've been cognitively people, that's been about 130,000 years. And for most of that period, we've been hunter-gatherers. Mm-hmm. For most of that period, the climate was incredibly variable. We had ice ages coming and going. Mm-hmm. And what's happened but during that whole time, our cognitive abilities have been the same. Mm-hmm. So you got 130,000 years. Most of the time, the climate's variable, and there are not many people on the planet. As soon as the climate settles down, and we get into this long period where things are predictable, immediately we have agriculture.
Yeah, we know when to plant.
We know when to plant because, even in Franklin County, our whole kind of economy here rests on 6 inches of topsoil and that when it rains when we need it to. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to a variable climate where we don't know when it's going to rain, mm-hmm. we don't know when spring is going to come, we don't know how severe the winter is going to be, agriculture no longer makes sense. Mm-hmm. And if agriculture doesn't make sense, everything collapses because we are still farmers.
Yeah. Al, is it all right for people to call in?
Sure.
Okay, so it's 967-2201?
That's it.
Okay, so if anybody wants to call in, ask questions of Stephen, or give your opinion on this matter of President Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, please call 967-2201. We would love to, hear from y'all. And so what do you think about this whole sort of it's either jobs or the environment kind of mentality that President Trump seems to be putting forth?
Well, I think that's a false narrative. It just simply is. Right now, clean energy economy is creating many more jobs than the traditional petroleum and carbon extraction economy. I mean, that's just true. Mm-hmm. That's where the future clearly lies, mm-hmm. is with creating these new technologies. And these are really good jobs. These are jobs that will employ people their entire lives. These are jobs that will provide retirements. These are jobs that will let people live in the community and have families.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you.
And I'm a small businessman. I don't like big government any more than anybody else. I mean, I hate being told what to do, but there are certain things we need our government to do for us. Mm-hmm. We need our government to make roads. We need our government to defend us and fight wars. And we need government to lead on really big issues like this.
Right.
Because it requires a society-wide commitment to making it happen.
Mm-hmm. There are a few corporations out there, such as Patagonia, who proactively, do use environmentally friendly practices just out of the goodness of their hearts. But most corporations and companies are, in the business of simply making money, and they're really not going to do it unless they're forced to.
You look at ExxonMobil right now. ExxonMobil had a shareholder revolt over climate change, and the shareholders said, we want accountability on climate change. Mm. So the tide is turning, and our government is doing something that most of the people in the country, including people in business, don't want to have happen. Mm-hmm. The energy sector realizes that we're going to move away from a carbon economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just talking with my nephew, who's a geology major and is definitely probably going to go work for oil companies. and he said that they are, all the big oil companies are, that's where they're, that's what they see as the future. They're headed there. They want to invest in that. He's a geologist, obviously, so he's invested in oil, but he realizes that that's probably, maybe only the next 30 years or something. And yeah, he can't understand why our president seems to be wanting to put the brakes on something that's pretty much inevitable.
Well, it's ceding leadership on a worldwide scale to other countries and other economies. It's ceding leadership to the Chinese and the Indian economies, because they're going to do this. They don't really have a choice. China does not want more pollution. It's making their country unlivable. So they're going to turn to cleaner technologies. They're going to develop them, and yeah, I guess we can have a greater trade imbalance with China because we'll be buying solar panels from them.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who live in China. We have a lot of students at Sewanee from China, and one thing that they marvel at when they come here is seeing a blue sky. Many of them have never seen a blue sky, because every day it's smoggy and gray, and people have to wear masks walking down the street. And that's what Los Angeles was like until the EPA, came in and put in the Clean Air Act. That's what New York City often looked like.
That's what Chattanooga was like.
Chattanooga, right.
I remember going to Chattanooga as a child, and you couldn't see across town. I mean, wow. you could barely see the steel plants from the highway. Mm-hmm. It was not something I care to repeat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing if you go online and look at before and after pictures of Los Angeles and Chattanooga and other big cities before the EPA and after. It's remarkable. I mean, and you couldn't get little individual businesses in Chattanooga or Los Angeles to do this, because then if one business does it and all the others don't, then they're at a disadvantage. If you're doing the right thing and no one else around you is, you're really at a disadvantage. But if everyone's forced to do it together, it happens, and it worked.
And that's what there are times that you need government to lead the way, because it levels the playing field. And I don't think anyone wants to go back to the way things were in the 60s and 70s when the air was so polluted. I know I don't.
What do you think, Al? You're being quiet over there.
Well, I'm just kind of listening,
Okay.
taking it all in. Rick read the Paris Act, and he gave me a couple of comments on it the other day. He read the first, I've got how many pages of this thing. So I don't know firsthand exactly what all's going on with it, but he was saying that the agreement itself was actually opening the door up for other countries to be able to do greater things, and it was lessening the United States' efforts to be able to do things. So I really don't know it well enough, but it said it looked to him like it was a disadvantage to the USA over the other countries in what was going to have to happen. And this thing is one of the reasons why there was so much, I guess, hesitancy.
Well, I believe that the U.S. and countries that have been industrially developed for longer, we have been putting more pollution into the air for a longer time, in comparison to other countries. So therefore, we are a little bit more responsible for dealing with it, or we are, I think, required to subsidize other countries putting. I don't know. Explain that, Stephen.
Well, I'm not sure, but I do know this. I know that we have the largest carbon footprint per capita of any nation on Earth. So China produces more carbon than we do, but per capita, so per person, our share is larger. So, yeah, we ought to bear a significant burden. And it's not really, compared to the size of our economy and the benefits that we will reap from a clean economy, burden is the wrong word. I would call it an investment.
So unfortunately, I'm not up enough on it to really be intelligent to talk about it. So I really don't quite understand it enough. But You know, I guess it's something we need to see. I know that everybody kind of laughed at Al Gore, a bunch of years ago when he was pushing the climate deal, and I think it hurt his feelings, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, what I thought was even funnier was Senator Inhofe walking into the U.S. Senate with a snowball in his hand and saying that because it snowed in Washington, D.C. that day, it meant that the planet is not getting warmer. I mean, just because the planet is getting warmer doesn't mean we don't have seasons anymore. And there's a difference between weather and climate. Weather is what the weather is doing on any given day, and climate is sort of the overall picture. And the overall picture, and this, you cannot deny it. It's just, you just read a thermometer and then take the average. The world is getting warmer every year. Every summer is hotter on average than the last summer. It doesn't mean we don't get winter anymore. We still get winter, but so there's a lot of misunderstanding out there that just because sometimes it's cold doesn't mean that this overall warming trend isn't happening. And any science, even if you're a climate change denier, cannot deny what a thermometer says.
And the scary thing is not so much the climate getting warmer, all that is scarier because ice caps melt, sea levels rise, but that introduces a lot of changes, drastic changes to the weather, and they're not necessarily things that you would expect. If the Gulf, right now the Gulf Stream keeps Europe warm, well, the Gulf Stream in a lot of models stops doing that, and Northern Europe becomes almost uninhabitable. Think about that for a second. Think about all those people moving somewhere else. That's a big deal. Huge migrations of people are what we're looking at.
But are we in a cycle deal? I'm not a historian, but there's talk of the Ice Age. At one time, are we in some kind of a cycle situation? Maybe I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't either. What I do know is that we are pumping geologic epochs of carbon into the atmosphere. So in the Carboniferous, a lot of carbon gets locked up, and it gets locked up as coal, it gets locked up as natural gas, and by locked up, I mean literally buried. And we are digging up millions of years worth of carbon that was buried, and we're pumping it right back into the atmosphere. That's going to have a dramatic effect on weather. Because what we're doing is we're kind of compressing time. That was carbon that had taken millions and millions of years to come out of the atmosphere and should take millions of years to go back in. And because we are people and we're industrious, we're just shooting it all back out there. And we just need to look at carbon like any other pollutant. We don't let people release toluene into the atmosphere willy-nilly because it kills you. And as it turns out, we just got to look at carbon as a pollutant.
I believe Arnold Schwarzenegger said it best. Would you, if you could walk into two rooms, in one room there was a electric car running, and in the other room there was a gas burning car running, and you had to close the door and stay in there for an hour, which room would you go into? Would you go into the room a closed up room with a gas burning car running? No, you would not. And so how can this not have an effect? How could it not be affecting us?
And of course it is. But look, we don't like change, right? I know I don't like change. I like to know things are going to be like they are. And anytime we talk about a big societal change, it's frightening for people. I know it's scary for me to think about, okay, well, what if we don't have gas anymore? What's that going to look like? But look, we are smart people. No one has ever done poorly by betting against the human race, and we'll figure this out. But keeping things the way they are it's not workable, not in the long run.
I agree. I totally agree.
8:35. If anybody got a comment, you can 967-2201. You can pick up the phone, call us, and chime in on the conversation. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you this morning. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more open, guys. If you want to give us a call and chime in this morning, we're sitting here off the air talking about electric cars, battery-powered cars.
So Al just told us that there was an electric car charging station right here in Winchester, across from City Hall. You said, okay. I'm wondering if anyone here in Franklin County has an electric car. I've seen a lot of hybrids.
I know of one that was here in town. Whether or not he still got it or not, I haven't seen him in it in a while. But I know of at least one. It was kind of an interesting looking car, you know.
Yeah.
See, it would never work for me because I don't have a garage. I have to park up on the street, so I would have to get a really, really long cord to do it. But
extension cord.
Yeah.
But we were just saying, if they had a thing where you could like go to the gas station, and instead of filling up with gas, you just switch out your uncharged battery for a charged battery or something. But we've got to start thinking this way,
Or a
into the
fast
future.
charger, or a hydrogen-based car. But this technology is coming, and Al, like you were saying, when the price comes down, and I guess Tesla is going to introduce a $35,000 car, which to me sounds like a lot of money, but I guess what's a Ford F-150 cost these days?
I don't know. I've never owned a $35,000 car.
Oh, me either. I mean, so I'll show you my truck when we're done here. It did not cost $35,000. But when that price comes down, like you were saying, they're going to be better. But it's this is coming. It's going to happen.
We're such a rural community that we're going to travel. 100 and something miles to get to Nashville and Chattanooga and Huntsville. Those kind of things, and people say, well, I'm scared I'm going to get caught out.
Right.
Yeah.
And my battery's going to die, so I'm worried about. Of course, there are gas battery type vehicles that are out there as well, but I'm sure those are probably up there too when it comes to cost.
Yeah, I don't know what a hybrid costs, but those are out there, and people use them.
But with a hybrid, you're never going to run out because you can just go to a gas station.
Right,
gas.
right.
You're never going to.
But it kind of defeats the overall purpose, right? The CDT, good morning.
This is Betty Fraley.
Hi, Betty Fraley.
I have a comment, as always.
Lay it on us, Betty.
Well, I missed a small portion. I had an interruption. You all may have already said this, but I think the reasoning behind the fact that the United States will be affected more than any other country is because we are the biggest polluters. So we've got more to correct than the other countries do. Now, that is my understanding. Have you all covered that?
Well, we yes and no. We really haven't gone into the fine points, I think, of the actual terminology of this measure.
Well, that is my understanding, that it would take, that we are the biggest polluters.
We are. Yeah, you're right.
By the way, I do have a hybrid car. Now, I don't have an electric car, but I have a hybrid car, and I get 41 miles to the gallon.
Wow. That's amazing.
So, okay.
That's a helpful thing in the pollution area. A hybrid car burns less fuel.
Well, Betty, thanks a lot. You're the reason why our gas tax just went up. Governor Haslam had to raise our gas taxes because
they're going to charge me more the next time I buy a license because I have a hybrid car.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get money from me that they're not going to get from you.
That's true.
Yeah.
But cars are.
My taxes will be bigger on my car. My license will be bigger on registration or something. Is going up to suffice for the fact that I'm not buying as much gas as other people.
Well,
That makes sense.
fair enough, I guess.
You know that?
Yeah, we do
Yeah.
that. But, also registration's going up on your tags for everybody as well.
But mine will be more because
I know.
I have a hybrid car.
I understand that. I think it's $100, I think?
Is it?
I think it's $100 a year is what it costs if you've got a hybrid or a battery powered car. I think is what it is.
Yeah. Okay, well that was all I had to add, but that was the theory that I have heard about the reason it would affect the United States more.
Cool. Hey, while I got you here, you want to toot Christina's horn for a moment?
Oh yeah.
Yes. Christine Hopkins?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Of course. We're getting the school. Christine has worked. I worked with Christine down at the jail for 7 years.
Right.
And she's been working on it all that time. The only two things that George Fraser did not get done when he's in the legislature that he worked hard and wanted to do was water at Key Springs and the vocational school here. So, believe you me, I am so thrilled that it's coming to fruition. Christine Hopkins is the one to thank for that.
Absolutely. She worked tirelessly, and I knew you'd want to put a shout out on that. All right, thanks, Betty.
Thank you, Betty.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, that is wonderful news. We're getting a technical school here.
Oh,
in Franklin
fantastic.
Yeah,
County.
groundbreaking is the 20th at 10 a.m.
And maybe they will be working at the electric car factory that they'll put in here. That would be wonderful.
There you go.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, or building solar panels or who knows what. So we could make them right here instead of buying them from China. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So why is it that we're subsidizing the already profitable oil industry and not subsidizing these?
They got better lobbyists.
Yeah.
And we do subsidize or have been subsidizing the green economy, but apparently we're not anymore. But that's a good point. We do heavily subsidize the petroleum and carbon extraction economies. That's what most of our taxes go to.
A lot of them do. And see, we were originally subsidizing these industries just to help them get up and on their feet. And then we just kept on doing it. Well, they're well up and on their feet. They are just so profitable, it's not even funny. Why are we still subsidizing them? It's the renewable industries that need to get up and on their feet, and they need our subsidies. You better believe it that China is subsidizing theirs.
Well, there are really good reasons to maintain leadership in a field, whether it's energy or anything. You want your nation to be the leader in the field. That's just best from a national security point of view. It's best from an economic point of view. And so you end up subsidizing things that are counterintuitive, like ExxonMobil or the auto industry. But it's important to keep that leadership. It's really important to keep that industrial capacity within your nation. And I don't know why on earth we would cede clean energy to India and China.
I swear I think it was just out of spite that Trump pulled out. I really do think it was just out of spite. Like, no one's gonna no one's gonna tell us what to do, blah blah blah. Anyway, whatever.
And good morning, you're on the end.
Good morning. How are you guys?
We're fine. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I've been sitting here listening, and one thing we're looking at climate change, right, and how it affects everyone. And 2 years ago, I read an article. I was curious about the Syrian civil war and how all of this happened. And this article basically attributed the civil war to climate change.
The Syrian Civil War?
There had been a 7 to 10 year drought that was unlike any other, could only be attributed to climate change, and that Assad was, militantly, trying to control the water, and all these farmers could not farm, go into the city, and there was all this civil unrest. So climate change is the cause of something as big as like the Syrian conflict. I mean, why don't we hear more about that?
That is a great point. And, our military generals, they recognize climate change as a global security threat, because when people are fighting over valuable resources such as water or arable land, that's what all disputes are essentially over land and the means of production.
Well, exactly. And you look at this, I mean, how many millions of people have been displaced for, a very simple thing that here we are in this huge combat. Of course, the military-industrial complex is making a ton. But, yeah, and I am kind of curious as to, like I said, this was a really excellent article, and I need to look it up again. But I just find it odd that you never hear anyone, going back to that and discussing what originally started this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And what started this conflict was a drought, as far as the Civil War itself and, the civil unrest.
Yeah. I mean, you might have two sects or two ethnic groups of people that always live peaceably together, and then all of a sudden, when there's something to fight over, such as water or whatever, that's when those sectarian or ethnic tensions bubble up.
Well, if you look at the refugee crisis within Europe, which is a mass migration of people from the Middle East and Africa into Europe, so from places that are showing real stresses brought on by climate change into a place that doesn't have those stresses as much. It's a huge migration of people. It's only going to get worse. those massive migrations of people who are really just they're looking for economic opportunity, they're looking for ways to feed their family, they're looking for a place that's safe, that's only going to get worse. We're only going to see more and more and more of that as the climate changes. So whatever we could do, and this takes a worldwide effort. It takes every country on Earth to agree to something, and that's what we did in Paris. The whole world, except for 2 countries, Syria, which was in the middle of a civil war, and Nicaragua, agreed on a framework to help slow this process down. And we need the governments on board in order to control something as big as what we're doing to the climate. Because that's the bigger issue. I mean, really, your individual actions don't make that much difference. You can be as efficient as possible. You can burn as much coal as you want. Personally, and the climate's so large, it's not going to make that much difference. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with pollution. There's no incentive for an individual steel mill to put on pollution controls if their competitors aren't going to do it. But if the government says everyone has to put on pollution controls, then you have a level playing field. So if you want to move towards controlling global warming, you need governments on board to do that. That's the only way it's going to happen.
But
yes, well, thank you. And like I said, I was just wanting to address that, yes, climate change does result in mass migrations of people, lots of conflict, and the refugee crisis that we're having today can be completely contributed to climate change. And thanks, you guys. Have a great morning.
thanks.
Bye.
Yeah, I mean, Tennesseans and Floridians, we're all Americans, right? But imagine if, like, the whole state of Florida moved into Tennessee. There would probably be some newly found tensions between Tennesseans and Floridians, I would say.
Absolutely, I would
They
think
come
so.
crowding into our beautiful county and, making everything trafficky and
everyone who lives in Miami is going to have to find a new place to live relatively soon. That's a lot of people.
Drain the swamp.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, when I think of where all these Florida people are going to go, I mean, I want our county to stay open and green and uncrowded. I love that we don't have traffic or too much crime. And boy, if a bunch of people move in from other places, it could cause some problems right here in our county. This could affect us. So we're not immune from this here. I definitely believe that we need to act.
8:52. Let's take one last break, and we'll be back to wrap things up in just a moment. Here we go. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. If you want to jump in with a phone call, you can. 967-2201 is the telephone number. We've been talking about climate change and how it's affecting people.
And I'd like to make one more point about something that is also not debatable. Like I said, you can debate about, if you want to, you can debate about whether climate change is a thing, whether it's part of a cycle within a cycle or whatever. But we also can't deny that CO2, not necessarily CO2 emissions, but fossil fuel emissions cause asthma. And there's such a increase in children with asthma. My son has asthma. If we have the choice between, like I said, would you go in the room with the gas car burning, or would you go in the room with the Prius, with the electric car burning? Nobody would go in the room with the gas car burning. It might not stay for a long time in your area, but it's the emissions. But eventually, it's gonna, they're not going anywhere. These emissions. We need to use energy and cars that don't create asthma-producing emissions, just for as a public health issue, and that's non-debatable. Nobody here can tell me that asthma is not made worse by pollution. That's non-debatable. So let's try and let's have leadership that's going to push us in the direction of a non-fossil fuel economy. We're going to use the fossil fuels until we get that set up, but we are not working hard enough like other countries are to get onto that, and it's just such a wasted opportunity, and it's all really like just to make a point, you know. I really think Trump was just trying to make a point and just stick it in the eye of Europe and the world.
Well, the decision was bewildering because almost everyone in government didn't want the U.S. to walk away from that accord. His Secretary of State didn't want that. His Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff did not want that.
And his Secretary of State had been the CEO of Exxon, a man who is in the fossil fuel industry. Who better to see the writing on the wall? He urged him against pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Okay, sorry, Stephen, go back.
Well, you know, so the government, large parts of the government's a big, complicated thing, are moving in the direction of recognize climate change is real and that it's a serious risk to our national security, and are moving in a direction to do what we can about it. And I will get depressed about the direction the world is going until I kind of remember a couple of things. And one is that this is a solvable problem. Remember the ozone layer? I mean, growing up, we were not going to have any, we were not going to have an ozone layer. We were all going to die of skin cancer at 25 because of refrigerants, right? Chlorofluorocarbons.
And hairspray.
It was in hairspray. It was in your air conditioner. And the world got together and we solved that problem. We found a different thing to use to cool our homes. Found a different thing to use in spray cans, and it's not an issue anymore. And global warming is a solvable problem, but we all have to get on board with it today.
And Stephen, you said only one thing today that I disagree with, that it doesn't matter what we do as an individual. I feel sometimes so disempowered and despairing when I hear the news and where our planet is heading. The only thing that gives me encouragement is my individual actions that I can do. That is 100% in my control. I can't control what Trump does with the Paris Accords or what big corporations do, but I have total control over whether I recycle, whether I, when I'm driving all the way down to Winchester, I'll make 2 or 3 stops instead of, 2 or 3 different individual trips. I try to limit my driving. I try to recycle. I try to not be wasteful. I think we don't want to diminish these individual acts that we have that are in our power.
Well, and I agree, and I applaud that. And there's a reason I'm not a politician. It's because I say things poorly all the time. I'm much more comfortable behind a camera than I am speaking, right? But my point is we need government leadership because you've got to get a society turned.
Right.
And it
We
takes
need
a society.
both.
We need both.
Yeah.
Both.
We need a government leading us in the right direction, and we also need to take responsibility for our own actions, environmentally speaking.
We got about a minute, guys.
Okay.
So, however you want to wrap it up.
Well, and we do have governments taking action. We have local governments. We have city governments, the city of Pittsburgh, city of Nashville, city of Knoxville, city of Chattanooga, that are committed to the Paris climate goals. And so you have this weird situation where local governments are leading and the national government is shirking its responsibilities, and it's appalling.
Right. Okay, and I have one more announcement before we go. Just to remind y'all again, the Franklin County Democratic Women will be meeting this Tuesday, June 13th at 6 o'clock at JD's Country Kitchen on Davy Crockett Highway in Winchester. And then on Saturday, June 17th at 9 a.m., the Franklin County Democratic Party will be meeting at the Annex in the small meeting room. Please join us. All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Helen. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Al, for having us. All right. Y'all have a great day.
All right, thank you. And we'll talk to someone, I guess, in a couple of weeks. All right. You're listening to WCDT AM 1340 W295.